Okay, so we have three panelists. So our first panelist is Liz Boylan. She's program director for the DEI program, the DEI and STEM higher education program at the Sloan Foundation. Our second panelist is Dr. Charlie Toll, who is the director of the mathematical sciences program at NSA. And our third panelist is Claudia Rankins, who is the program director for the HBCU UP program at NSF. So I'll ask them to give their remarks in that order. So Liz, would you like to go first?
I will, and I'll get myself unmuted. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm really so happy to be with you and have the opportunity to think back to what was important to me over different parts of my career in terms of developing an ability to make really effective arguments in various and sundry ways. Arguing well, I think, is one of the best things we can do for ourselves and our disciplines. So that's the perspective I come from. So I am the program director in diversity, equity, and inclusion in STEM higher education at the Sloan Foundation. And one of the first things that I would point you to when you're looking to get support for anything that you're doing is to really interrogate the website. It is amazing what can be found on a website, a foundation's website, and maybe not in the places that you would expect. So what I did as I went through and the slides show, I showed you the pages where some little pearls of wisdom I think are located on the Sloan one. But there are other ones that are look under press releases, look under annual reports. The president of the Sloan Foundation writes an essay every year on what's important to the Sloan Foundation. So there are ways to figure out more than the standard language on the landing page, how your ideas might fit and how you can go about figuring out who could help you strategize. So the bad news is every foundation has its own universe and you have to learn how to sort of navigate it and interpret the kinds of opportunities that it supports. But the good news is there is a lot of information out there if you are creative about how you are using the material that is publicly available. The next thing I want to just make sure that, this is an example. Again, the Sloan Foundation funds research and education in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and economics. So finding out the particular fields that are the primary fields is something really important, because you shouldn't waste a lot of your time going after opportunities that are probably remote at best. And then one of the things about, this is on slide 3, it's a little table about the Sloan grant programs. No foundation can be everything to everybody. Maybe NSF and NIH can be the most, but private foundations make choices. And so inform yourselves about the choices. But as much as I say that, so we have research programs in economic institutions in energy and environment in the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. There's some programs a foundation will have that will be cross-cutting programs that may not be so obvious as to match something that you would want to do. And one of the cross-cutting, well, there are two I would cite at Sloan. One is technology, because we support technology approaches across all of the other research domains. And I'm happy to now say that we support diversity programs across all of our research programs, in addition to the ones that are particularly targeted within the STEM higher education program. And we reference that internally as diversity unsiloed. So they're not only talking to the person that heads the STEM higher education program, but you can talk to things about diversifying your field and about college opportunities with program directors from all of these different research programs. The fourth slide about grant making strategy and processes, I think is very important to know that it's there, and the links to things like what we do not fund are extremely useful. So again, to be able to target it a little bit better. And then I wanted to, because when we were talking about this presentation, to personalize it a little bit more and to give you some reflections about my own career and what was most important to me as I look back in terms of learning how to be successful in writing of different kinds. So this is the pathway to the program director, my way, but not the only way. So I started out professionally, as I'm sure you have already and will continue, writing my own research grants. It is a highly structured formula, and I think it's important that you learn the formula, because transgressing outside how a particular agency or foundation wants you to present your argument sometimes is a risk. It's not to say that you shouldn't take a risk sometimes, but know what your risk is. One of the things I think I benefited hugely from is early opportunities to be on grant review committees. And at least in my university, there was a small grants program, you know, $1,000 program, $1,500 was a big grant. But once you get one of those, you often are asked to be on the review committee for the next set of grants, and the opportunity to see what others do with the same opportunity that you had, I think is a really important kind of opportunity to build upon. And then when the time comes and you're drafted to be on a committee for some big institutional grant, embrace that too. You learn a lot about grant writing from the arguments that you and your colleagues have about what you're going to ask money for. And how are you going to sell your institution or your department? And so those collaborative efforts, I think, are ones to also think about and invest in, because I found them very useful. And then I put down at the bottom here the various titles I had along the way before I became program director at the Sloan Foundation. This was only about 9 years ago. I had no intention in my career of becoming a program director. So, you know, you never know what choices you'll have and what opportunities there will be and what you want to do at a particular time. But the experiences that I had on the other side of the desk, as it were, in writing grants and participating in other kinds of grant writing activities has served me very well in this position. So I just, you know, life is not linear, and embrace the non-linearity of it as you go along. And then on slide 7, there are just a couple of sort of open points that I'd like to plant in, and I hope we'll have time to come back to have you ask questions and discuss other examples of it later on in the discussion. The first one was know your audience or audiences and their expectations. So think about who is going to read your proposal. It's not just one, usually, it's not just one person. So at the Sloan Foundation, it is the program director first. You have to get through her or him. But then it's going to be other people at the Sloan Foundation in other fields. So this is not, so I would be the sort of local specialist, but my colleagues weigh in also. The president will weigh in. And then we send it out to external review in your field. So, but that's a different audience. So just being conscious that your proposal has to be interpretable and understandable and accessible to multiple audiences might cause you to shift some of the language and make sure that you're defining terms and that you're transmitting the excitement that you have about your work. It's not just talking to people in your field. And the second one there is to develop and deploy your own distinctive voices. And this is related to the audience part, but I think there are these different genres of the writing that we do that are all really professionally important. One is the research article, and that, as much as a proposal, is extremely formulaic. And at least in my experience and in my field, you got your knuckles knocked if you transgress past, not using adjectives and adverbs. And it just was the data. And it was often hard, I found, and they wanted you to cut 25%. They didn't care what you cut, but it had to be shorter. There's probably less of that in these days of virtual journals. So the research article and the proposal following the guidelines, I think it's important that you do know the risks, at least, of not following that. But then there are other kinds of writing, and I think this is where I've really, I've enjoyed it, and I've learned a lot from the other kinds of writing that one can do as a professional. And all of these, the skills you learn in one, I think are transferable to others. There are newsletters and blogs, and certainly some of the social media people are doing a lot more writing than they used to do, and those all have different formats. I think one of the most instructive things I had to do when I was an assistant provost is one of the jobs that person has is to write letters and write other documents for the president or the provost. And so I had to know the material, but then I had to have an ear for how Shirley Kenny, who was president of Queens College at the time, how she talked. What was her vocabulary? What would be interesting? What would be authentic for me to write on behalf of her? And it was a really interesting challenge. It wasn't just my voice, but you have to pay attention to voice, and you have to pay attention to the audience that is going to. So I did not do very well in my Introduction to English Composition course in college. I really hated the essays we had to write. But I must say, over the years, I have really come to enjoy writing in these different genres, and enjoying the notion of constructing and arguing your points convincingly and well. So I'm going to stop there and welcome opportunities to talk after the others have presented.
Great, thank you, Liz. Charlie, would you like to go next?
Sure. Can everybody hear me? I hope so.
Yes.
Thank you again for the invitation. I'm happy to be here and see so many people who are interested in what we have to say. I'm from the National Security Agency, and I am in charge of our mathematics grants program called the Mathematical Sciences Program. One of the things that may occur to any of the panelists is, why does NSA, an organization that's part of the intelligence community with a very special kind of technical mission, why are they involved in supporting disinterested mathematical research? And it goes back about 30 years, 1989, when it became clear to the leaders in the math community at NSA that it was necessary to engage the mathematical community in order to have access to students who we may eventually hire. So we found some common ground with the professors. They were not at all bashful about saying that supporting their research opportunities would be a good thing for us to do. So we had our charter that set up the NSA amended so that we could participate in this type of work. And And we've been doing that in one capacity or another for since 1989. Um, I joined NSA in 1984 and have been active in this program mainly as a reviewer of proposals that have been sent in. And about 7 or 8 years ago, I was essentially the assistant program director, and for the last 4 or 5 years have been the program director. What are some of the things that we do, the sort of things that we support? Well, our goal, one goal anyway, is to improve the pipeline in mathematics. We want to see more Americans studying mathematics, studying advanced mathematics, doing research in mathematics, and pursuing careers in the mathematical sciences, whether it's academia or private industry or government, for example. And so we do support activities like research experiences for undergraduates. We support conferences. Some of these are what I would call high-tech conferences. They're really conferences for experts. And we also support conferences whose main goal is to encourage people to pursue math careers, to let them know about mathematical opportunities, or conferences where a great deal of work is done in creating mentorships and other support networks. We also have a sabbatical program where we bring in professors to spend a year with us and learn what we do, and then go back to their universities and perhaps encourage their students to take a look at NSA as a career. Our program is rather small, certainly compared to major private organizations or the NSF. And right from the beginning, we have had a rather limited range of topics that we support research in. And those are algebra, number theory, combinatorics or discrete math, probability, and statistics. So initially this was because we simply didn't have the capacity to review proposals in every area in mathematics. And those 5 areas were the ones that played a predominant role in math research at NSA. So we still continue to do that. However, for some of the programs like the research experience for undergraduates, the emphasis is on developing undergraduates, and we don't put any restriction on the content of what research those undergraduates are going to engage in. We're especially interested in expanding diversity in the mathematical fields. It's clear that the underrepresented minorities are really underrepresented, and there's a lot of talent in those groups, and we would like to see it given a chance to develop. And so we have a good deal of efforts involved in supporting programs that are really geared to make math available and accessible and opportunities known to people who may not be aware of these things. I think that's about as much as I can say now. More information is found on our website. You have the URL for that. And of course, I'll be standing by to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Claudia?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Claudia Rankins. I'm the program officer at the National Science Foundation for the HBCU undergraduate program, as well as the HBCU Excellence in Research program. So I wanted to share my path to NSF with you because I wanted to encourage you to consider joining NSF for a year or two as a rotator, or maybe even 3. We certainly can use some different perspectives, some different ideas, people from different backgrounds at NSF. I worked for 22 years at Hampton University. I started out as a math instructor. And while I was teaching my 5 to 6 courses every semester, I also worked on my PhD in physics, and so Hampton University is my alma mater. I eventually ended up being the Dean of Science there. And just as I was thinking about maybe doing something on the more national scale, I get a call from my program officer at NSF who asks me if I want to consider applying for the position. And lo and behold, I applied and I was fortunate enough to be chosen. So I've been at NSF for 12 years. We do have, like I am now permanent, we have permanent program officers, but we also have many program officers who rotate in for a few years and are on loan from their institutions through a program called IPA. Don't ask me what it stands for, Intergovernmental something something. I think NSF is the main funder of mathematics research as far as the funding agencies go. On my slides, I listed all of the topics we fund in math, and those are just, you know, the traditional math proposals you can send in, from algebra and number theory to topology. But we also fund math education research. So sometimes I run into faculty who are certainly teachers of mathematics, researchers of mathematics, but are also interested in maybe bringing in social justice issues into the field. And oftentimes, you know, how do you do that when you write your proposal in geometric analysis, other than supporting 1 or 2 students? If you do math education research, then that can be much easier incorporated. You know, I funded a PI, for example, and he is doing his research on Black male undergraduate mathematics students and what particular issues they face. So I listed the programs that fund mathematics education for you on my slides. I also listed some other programs that may be of interest, like we have a research experiences for undergraduate program. If you're early in your career at the assistant professor level, don't have tenure yet, haven't been promoted to associate professor, we have a program called Career, geared specifically to early career faculty. There may be some other things of interest for faculty at historically Black colleges and universities. I see Hanak on here, I know from Howard, and then I see, of course, people from Spelman. I don't see everybody else's name, but the HBCU UP program has a track called Research Initiations Award, and that's for faculty who have not had prior research funding, who, when they apply to the Division of Mathematical Sciences, are being told, oh, you haven't done enough, you haven't published enough, you haven't done enough, whatever, preliminary data. So you can apply for one of those Research Initiation Awards and get some publications out, and then apply to the Division of Mathematical Sciences. We also have a brand new congressionally mandated program called HBCU Excellence in Research for research proposals from faculty at HBCUs who can, however, collaborate with colleagues at other HBCU institutions or non-HBCUs. So I sent you a few slides to peruse, some tips on successful proposal writing, what opportunities we have, just all sorts of things I thought you could or might be interested in. The last slide has my contact information. In case you have further questions about NSF and want to email me, maybe your questions come to you after this hour is over. So like everyone else, please feel free to ask any questions you have now or later.
Great, thank you, Claudia. So we'll just open it up for discussion now. I'll just draw your attention to the chat where one question has already been asked and answered by Liz about which areas of mathematics that the Sloan Foundation funds. So you might want to take a look at that if you had a similar question. And then I see another question that has just popped up to for Claudia. Maybe you can see this, Claudia.
Yes, I can.
The question is,
okay. So somebody asked about grant extension, but then also COVID-19 comes up. So I failed to mention that we did recently get a few dollars from Congress to fund research that is COVID-19 related. We're pretty much for this fiscal year, I have to say, have expended those funds. So if you're interested in submitting one of those, they're called rapid proposals that are in response to current issues. It probably won't be quite so rapid now because you have to wait until the next fiscal year in October before new funds become available. We have been lenient in terms of granting no-cost extensions to PIs, as well as supplying as best as we can supplemental funding and little small extensions on annual reports that are due. If you need an extension to your grant, you need to go to research.gov and officially submit a no-cost extension. So it's not automatically given to you. You do have to request it. It takes all of 2 sentences of explanation, and your sponsored research office must push the button so we actually can act on your no-cost extension. Keep in mind that for an NSF grant, from the day your award is given to you, you only have 7 years then to expend the funds. So we can only extend you for so many years. After 7 years, the Treasury will come and claim the money and it goes back to the Treasury. But if you have a 3-year proposal, you can get up to 4 no-cost extensions if you ask for it.
I see there's another question in the chat about the research initiation funding that you mentioned, Claudia. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Certainly, this is for HBCU UP faculty. I'm sorry, for HBCU faculty only. So if you are not at an HBCU, unfortunately, this opportunity doesn't extend to you. But those are basically 3-year, $300,000 awards for PIs without prior federal funding to start your research or to reinitiate your research. You know, you may have been, like me, a dean, and then you want to get another research grant, and the funding agencies laugh at you because you haven't done any math in 10 years. So it's for people who want to initiate their research or initiate it again. There has to be an involvement of undergraduate students in the project, but other than that, it's whatever research you're proposing that is funded by NSF. So I think I included the link to the solicitation. I'm pretty sure I did to the slide, and you can go to the solicitation and read more or write me.
Are there any other questions? You can feel free to just chime in. I see some questions are coming through the chat. Another one from Sherry Scott is asking about anything similar for non-HBCU institutions at NSF. So the research initiation grant you just described, are there other programs at NSF or even at the other foundations that might apply to non-HBCU faculty?
Not at NSF, unless you're at a tribal college. They have a similar track. Other than that, I would just encourage you to go to the Division of Mathematical Sciences, talk to the program officer, and ask how you can best be competitive as someone new to this, as a first-time PI. There are initiatives currently underway for new awardees, but they haven't been put in place. So I'll let others speak to that as well.
Yeah, Charlie or Liz, do you have any programs that you would highlight for similar interests?
Well, unfortunately, the NSA Math Sciences program no longer awards individual research grants. For many years we did. We had Young Investigator Awards and Senior Awards. And these were awarded after consultation with panels that were set up by the American Math Society, which helped us validate and order the proposals by their merit. A few years ago, we ran into various budget problems in the government, and our budget basically went from, well, we lost about half of the budget, and the reorganization was to not continue the individual research grants. But we still have the conference grants, the REUs, and special situations like adjoint, for example, which is not really an individual research grant, but it's a grant to a group of people who are trying to pursue research in a different sort of a way, I guess. But we don't have the individual grants any longer.
I bring to your attention, forgive me, you may know all about this and already belong and are part of these two circles of individuals and campuses. There's an organization that we provided some early money to. I don't think we have them as a current grantee. I know the Carnegie Foundation was putting major money into it, called TIPSY Math, Transforming Post-Secondary Education in Math. Are you aware of that? So I think it's the tipsymath.org. So this is a community that is getting grant funding that is trying to revolutionize the teaching of math. So to the extent that this might be an interesting community for you to be involved in and see who is funding them, that might be a strategy. And the other organization that we have supported, and I know NSF has supported this and maybe NSA too, is the National Math Alliance. And this is the organization that has research universities in math that is who are seeking to diversify their graduate student populations, who affiliate with and develop relationships with strong undergraduate math programs that may or may not have their own PhD program. And they are most famous for running a conference called the Field of Dreams Conference, which is, I haven't been, but from all reports I've heard, is really a transformational experience for the undergraduate students and their mentors on their undergraduate campus, but then also for the math faculty at research universities who are trying to work on pipelines so that there are pathways so that they can recruit and successfully graduate from the PhD promising mathematicians. So I think both of them, the National Math Alliance moved from the University of Iowa, where it was for a long time, several years ago, to Penn State. So it's based there now. So both of those, if you don't know about them, they would be worth knowing about.
Thanks, Liz. So there's a couple of other questions that came up. One about the areas that are covered under the RAPID grant for COVID-19. So maybe Claudia, you could take that one.
So we did not specify the areas. What we did say that if you have an idea for a RAPID, you should contact the program officer in the program into which you think your research fits. That goes for any RAPID you're proposing. So anytime you're responding to a situation as the current one, to a natural disaster with some kind of research, and in math I can see prediction research, all sorts of types of mathematical modeling research. We also fund mathematical biology. So don't just send a proposal in. We don't want you to waste your time if we don't either have money for the idea. Send a one-pager to the appropriate program officer, go to the webpage, find out the person, and then say, is this something that is being funded under this announcement, in this case about the RAPID COVID-19, is there funding available? That's my suggestion. And then somebody asked about how you can put a pause on the clock when you have had a sabbatical. So I let the other person speak for that as well. For NSF, if you have a grant and for some reason there needs to be a pause, be it a sabbatical, be it illness, be it the birth or adoption of a child for a while, could be lots of things. Just let your program officer know. There's like nothing official you need to do. We will just tell you, okay, just, take the pause. Let us know in your annual report why you paused, and then ask for a no-cost extension at the end to finish the project. I'm not sure if this is different elsewhere, but contact your program officer.
Yeah, we liberally give no-cost extensions, so it really is a matter of it's good to alert your program officer early, and if there's any rebudgeting that needs to be done, then that's the time to discuss it. But it's you should feel absolutely free to do that.
Our grants are generally only for 1 year. However, we're very open to offering no-cost extensions really for any reason at all. With the current epidemic, we're seeing a number of programs that we wanted to support this year, which are not taking place. They've postponed the conferences until next year. And when I get back to work, I'm sure that's going to be one of the things that we'll spend the time it takes to make sure those grants can stay in place for a year. Our money, however, is only good for 2 years. So if you're going to postpone the conference until 2022, you probably have to reapply.
Okay. Are there any other questions? I guess I have sort of a general question about maybe from each one of your perspectives, talking about what, what features some of the most competitive grant proposals have, and maybe a little bit about kind of the acceptance rate for various programs. I think sometimes it's hard to tell as a grant applicant how competitive the program you're applying for is, or do you have any advice about that?
So I can start by saying that NSF does not allow us anymore to talk about rates. We're not allowed to say how many proposals came in, because you can go to the award search database and see how many have been funded and thus deduce the declination rate. So we don't allow that anymore. Basically, my advice is write the best proposal you can possibly write, and make sure you have people reading it before you submit it, but also talk to the different programs about sort of what the focus is. So I would assume if you are applying to our division of mathematical science, their focus is on the science. They want to just simply hear, what are you proposing? What gap does it fill in the literature? How are you going to do this? What are you going to do if things don't work out as planned, and so forth? If you're more, if you're, say, writing an REU proposal, or you're writing a career proposal, or you're writing an education research proposal, and we're looking for other things as well. All NSF proposals are judged on intellectual merit and broader impact. And you must show that your research has intellectual merit and broader impacts. And you must show that your related education and outreach and broadening participation activities have intellectual merit and broader impacts. If you can convince us of that, we do our very best to find the money to fund you.
Charlie, do you want to? Yeah, go ahead. You're muted.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
Our success rates, and for example, with the REUs, somewhat more than half of the proposals get funded. They're usually funded only for 1 year, however. So oftentimes we're seeing the same PIs come back year in and year out. That's okay. With conferences, the success rate is actually a little higher. The ones that don't make it tend to be perhaps a little too parochial in their interest, or not particularly well thought out about how they're presenting their material. Since we give grants only for 1 year, we're often asked to supplement other proposals that are either have already been granted or are pending. So it's in writing up the budget, it's important to ask us for what we can do rather than try to game the system and say, well, I'll put all of my extra costs and supplementary and nice things on the NSA side and keep them off the NSF side. We would look at that and say, what if you didn't get the NSF grant? You would have this money to do something that isn't actually going to help any of the students. So a nice balanced budget, if getting a grant from us will bring 6 more students to an REU, then show that. We'll support 6 students. We'll support the faculty it takes to mentor those students. Uh, uh, I looked at Claudia's slides the other day, and I had a sense of deja vu because I think one of our previous math science program directors simply took the NSF checklists there, the criteria, and she sent it on to all of us who were reviewing proposals and so forth. So we still stick with that. We're very much aligned with the NSF's ideals about what it takes to get a grant. Uh, uh, in particular, the broad impact statement is important, and I tend to look at that as is this program going to bring in people from all over the country? If it's the proposals that are not really competitive are ones where a professor wants to run a program pretty much just in his own university. And that loses on broad impact, and it never really recovers that step. So try to keep your program open to everybody and have a good plan for reaching out to a lot of people too. Okay, thank you.
The Sloan Foundation runs its solicitations quite differently, certainly from NSF, in the sense that we almost never put out RFPs or open calls for proposals. So we operate through a letter of inquiry, and it's actually much like what Claudia was describing before. If you're not sure about a particular grant, then contact the program director, program officer. So that's the first stage, and depending on the program director, on our website there are rules about it's got to be X number of pages and so forth. What I ask my people that solicit some help is to fill out our program cover sheet. It's one page, and it leads you through 5 or 6 bullets where you talk about a objective and some specific activities and impact and so forth. It's a really wonderful distillation. So if you can distill your grand idea onto one page with the bullets that you will eventually have to write to get a Sloan grant anyway, I think it's a really useful exercise. And the other thing that I always want to see along with that is either 1 or 2 budget iterations. So what would you do if you wanted to do this particular idea on a pilot or planning basis for $50,000 or $100,000? And what would it take to scale it up for a 3-year grant for $300,000 or $500,000? Those are totally different funding streams and sets of expectations. So when you're developing the idea, at what stage is the idea and what would a useful amount of money be? And then work with those limitations and develop a really convincing budget of what you would spend the money on and why you really need it. What resources does your university have already? What kind of resources do you have? Is a sabbatical coming up and you'll be on paid sabbatical, and therefore you'll be able to devote more time to the work? All of those things come into play when you are making an assessment of whether you want to have a further conversation with this person, that the stars are aligned. And so the hard part about my job is the number of letters of inquiry I just turned down at the start. Once you get an invitation to submit a proposal, if you write up a really good proposal along the lines of what was outlined, it has a much higher probability of being funded. And once you and the program director have agreed that it's now ready to go to the first level of staff review, then frankly, it's up to me to argue for your proposal. So it's a very different dynamic than if you are in a panel, with a study section with 30 other people who all are going to be chewing on it. So that's what I meant about you have to know your foundation and what the audience, who the audiences are, and how carefully to heed the advice that you're given at these various stages. One of the things that that I think is the most important in terms of one of the reasons I give for most of my declinations is the person has come in with a good idea. It is such a good idea that studies have been written on what a good idea it is to implement this kind of mentoring program or that kind of pathways program. And what they're asking for is money to replicate that on their campus. And that, I have to say, for a national funder, that's not how we operate. We cannot provide enough mini grants to implement great ideas on all of these different campuses, however wonderful the people are and however important the needs are. So that would be the one area where I think you would be least successful if you were only trying to serve your own campus on known strategies. We are much more interested if you are developing a new strategy, are partnering with other institutions, have some reasonable prospects of growing the scale so that it will matter nationally.
And if I could say ditto to what Liz just said and answer the question about submitting proposals with other agencies where there are overlap. So we ask for you to fill out the form current and pending support, where you are listing all of your current funding as well as the funding you have submitted to NSF and other agencies. And we will check before we make an award that you did not receive a similar award elsewhere. So if you have submitted in combinatorics a proposal to the National Security Agency and you're proposing pretty much the same thing to NSF, you will not get both. So you have to submit different proposals. They can both be in combinatorics, but they have to be on different research topics. So there should be no overlap in your idea between funding agencies.
That is absolutely true. I would underscore that. I would also encourage you, though, to think about situations where you can have more than one foundation fund some big project that you want to do. I have funded with and co-funded with NSF and with the Mellon Foundation and other large foundations. So sometimes it's a matter that there's some commonality, but the Mellon Foundation, for example, funds mostly in the humanities and some of the humanistic social sciences, and that's something that Sloan doesn't fund. But what we are both interested in is graduate education. And so we have co-funded things that improve graduate education for all graduate students. So it's that kind of suturing together funding opportunities across agencies or across foundations that I think you can really start stacking up some considerable money. And then you have two foundations behind you.
Okay, great, thank you. We have about a minute left. Are there any other questions for our panelists?
I have a question. Just to follow up on my question about overlap, I think it was addressed for when it's 100% overlap. How about if it's, say, 20% overlap? You have two different topics, but there's just a tiny little bit of overlap. Is there a way to address that?
I would say always when in doubt about anything, talk to the program officer. You know, call the NSF program officer, say, I have submitted a research proposal in this area. And so I'm not talking now about educational proposals that deal with students or deal with implementing new courses or new teaching pedagogies. I'm talking about research. Ask your program officer, if I submitted this to XYZ agency and I want to submit this to NSF, do you consider that too much overlap? And they will tell you. Certainly in other areas, you know, there could be a little bit more overlap. I mean, like an REU, you could have an REU with NSF and you could have the supplement to the National Security Agency for that same REU, and that would not be considered an overlap. I'm talking about just the research, okay?
Any other questions?
Can I say one more thing, please, Naomi?
Absolutely.
If your proposal gets declined, first of all, that is not I always see that on Twitter. People say, I've been rejected. It is not a rejection when your proposal gets declined. It is we did not have enough money to fund our proposals that were submitted. You see that on our first slide, 42,000 proposals per year, and we have funds for about 11,000. So, you know, the rate varies by program, but don't see it as a rejection. See it as, wow, I have some great feedback now to rewrite this proposal and to do better. So we do not have resubmissions as such at NSF, but you are allowed to significantly revise your proposal and to resubmit it during the next cycle, okay? So don't give up. I see too many times where faculty, after one decline, I never hear from them again because they were like, man, they gave me an F and now I'm not taking this class again, okay? What do you tell your students when they don't do well? You do encourage them, I hope, to come to the class again with a new attitude and ace it the second time around. So I want you to do the same for your proposals, okay?
Great advice. Thank you. Okay, well, if there aren't any other questions, I don't want to keep you all from all of the things that you are up to for the rest of the day. So I just want to take a moment to thank our panelists again for being here and for providing all of this information. Perhaps we can give them a round of applause and also refer you to their slides if you want to contact them again and follow up with any other questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.